DA Verber will make a quick comment, and then I'll start. I know this is a very complicated case, so I prepared just a little presentation for you. So please pay attention because it is complicated, but I've tried to anticipate all your questions. Some of the questions, the answers you might not like, but I've considered them. So, we're almost ready.
Larry, you up?
Okay. And I'm going to introduce Tori Verber Salazar, District Attorney of San Joaquin County.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for being here today. We're here on behalf of the people of the state of California versus Anthony Silva. This case involves an ongoing criminal appropriation of public money, embezzlement, grand theft, money laundering, and knowingly keeping false accounts. This investigation has been led by the San Joaquin County District Attorney's Bureau of Investigation in partnership with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And during the course of this ongoing investigation, we have determined that Mr. Silva's ongoing criminal actions warranted prosecution. In order to prevent further harm to the community that has year in and year out consistently supported these organizations, but more importantly, to protect children, the most disadvantaged, economically disadvantaged children in our community were taken advantage of. This was money and resources for them who needed it. And it was taken, stolen, and misused by him. You cannot steal from the public. You cannot steal the public's trust and not expect to be held accountable in San Joaquin County. He destroyed 45 years of good work at the Boys and Girls Club, a well-respected and a heavily endowed institution, for his own personal ill-gotten gains. This is the theft of public money, and this is the theft from our children. And it will not be we will not stand by and watch this occur. So going forward, we'd like to put on a presentation to you as to the charges and to how we're going to proceed in this investigation.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Robert Himmelblau. I am a Deputy District Attorney with the San Joaquin County District Attorney's Office. I am currently the supervisor of the homicide unit. However, I've taken over this particular case. I presented a little PowerPoint here for you to be able to understand the nature of the charges. If you look at the indictment that you probably have picked up from the court's office downstairs, you'll see essentially what are the charges that are pending before Mr. Silva. They can appear to be a little staid in their wording, and so I want to make sure to drop it down to easy understanding, lay type of person.
John Burkett, please contact Rebecca in intake. John Burkett, please contact Rebecca in intake. Thank you.
I want to make sure that you understand the indictment and put it into lay terms. So I'm going to try to not knock over your microphones while I go over this. All right, so to be clear, and this is something that I touched upon in the court, the dates of violations that we're talking from are only from January 1st, 2010 to February 24th, 2014. All charges other than counts 4 and 6 relate to the Stockton Boys and Girls Club. Count 6, which is grand theft, relate to the National Boys and Girls Club. And count 4 is money laundering, which relate to both Boys and Girls Clubs. All counts have monetary enhancement allegations. So, on top of the actual charge itself, we allege further that the amount went over a certain amount, which brings in different types of penalties, and those are called allegations. The penal code charges, which you can read yourself, are count 1, misappropriation of public monies, count 2, embezzlement, count 3, grand theft, count 4, money laundering, count 5, it says embezzlement from a public officer or by a public officer because that's the general code section. However, it relates to a specific element or different specific count in that seven paragraph penal code, and it is knowingly keeping any false account or making false entry in any account of or relating to public monies. And count 6 is the grand theft charge, and that, again, is for the National Boys and Girls Club. The count 1 allegations allege that the defendant misappropriated public monies, and he did so by engaging in a double dipping scheme, where he received public money from the National Boys and Girls Club. When I say public money, I mean this is grant money from the government for services that he already was being paid for by the Stockton Unified School District. And he had to sign documents indicating that he would not engage in such activity, and he did so anyway. Note, while going forward, the Stockton, the SUSD and the National Boys and Girls Club money that came into through public money to the Boys and Girls Club paid for the employees of the Stockton Boys and Girls Club. And more specifically, those employees were specifically engaged in mentoring programs with the children, the officers, the board members, and more importantly, Anthony Silva was not to receive any of this money. His money came from private donations and fundraisers, not these grants. Count 2, that the defendant fraudulently appropriated, that is embezzled, those public monies after he was entrusted with that money. Count 3, that the defendant took public money over a certain value, grand theft. Now this is not the special enhancement, because grand theft is anything over $950. So if you take $1,000, you're guilty of grand theft. We alleged a higher amount of money in this particular case, and that's why the allegation is there. And that he did so intending to permanently deprive them of those public monies. You guys are killing me. Thanks, yeah. Count 4, that the defendant, to achieve the above criminal activity, conducted a series of financial transactions through financial institutions. This is what's called money laundering. So, initially, the National Boys and Girls Club gave money on this double dipping scheme to Mr. Silva, who controlled the bank accounts, ostensibly for the Boys and Girls Club. However, that money flowed not into the current and active Boys and Girls Club account, but flowed into another bank account. When the Stockton Boys and Girls Club accounts, because there were a couple, dropped below a certain level, or dipped low, Mr. Silva then would funnel money that he was hiding in Bank 1 to shore up the Stockton Boys and Girls Club funds. For whatever reason, at this point it's not clear. But he was funneling money, hiding it in Bank 1, and then funneling it into the Stockton Boys and Girls Club when their account level dipped too low. Between the January 1st of 2010, and these are specific dates that I'll explain to later, and December 31st, 2013, the money then flowed from the bank down to the Stockton Boys and Girls Club, and then a significant portion of money flowed from the Stockton Boys and Girls Club account specifically into Anthony Silva's personal bank account. These are the items that we looked at in determining this money laundering scheme. These are Stockton Unified School District documents, bank records, credit card records, and National Boys and Girls Club records. The FBI spent a considerable amount of effort trying to figure this out. These are thousands of pages of documents that had to be data entered into computer programs, then analyzed by a forensic accountant. Then, not only did the money flow from Bank 1, where the double dipping money was sitting in, hidden from the rest of the board members and the treasurer, so mentioned by Mr. Skurlitz. It flowed from the to the Boys and Girls Club bank account into Anthony Silva's account, and additionally, during this period of time, close to $75,000 in cash flowed into Mr. Silva's bank account. We don't know where that money came from. But it does bear repeating that Mr. Silva's total salary is paid by private donations and fundraisers. The Stockton Kids Club. A similar pattern occurred after the Boys and Girls Club lost their charter and continued into 2/24/14. Why do I pick that date? That is the last day, that's a day, that the National Boys and Girls Club basically cashed out their account with the Boys and Girls Club. They had a certain amount of money left over, and they dumped it all back to the Boys and Girls Club. The money then that was left over from the National Boys and Girls Club was put into that Stockton Boys and Girls Club account. Then an amount similar to that was dispersed to the defendant. So, as this diagram shows, the National Boys and Girls Club will funnel money through Anthony Silva because they only knew of this bank account, this bank number 1. The National Boys and Girls Club did not know about the active Stockton Boys and Girls Club account. So the National Boys and Girls Club money went into bank number 1. That money was slowly funneled into the Boys and Girls Club. However, after February, around February of this time, after the charter was lost, the Boys and Girls Club dispersed the rest of the money to the Stockton Boys and Girls Club. That money went into the Stockton Kids Club in a certain amount. Nearly that exact same amount, in the thousands of dollars, went directly into a brand new account set up by Anthony Silva. Count 5 allegations. The defendant knowingly made false entries relating to public monies and public funds. This is essentially how the double dipping scheme was accomplished. As I said before, the money that was given to the Boys and Girls Club by public funds, grants from the federal government and from the SUSD, was for payment to direct employees who are working at the various Boys and Girls Club sites, which means there has to be time cards. So time cards are, people are paid. They submit a time card. That time card then is submitted to the Stockton Unified School District. The Stockton Unified School District looks at the time, the amount of hours done, and then gives a reimbursement to the Boys and Girls Club. That's how it's supposed to work. Then, what Mr. Silva did was he created a duplicate set of time cards and submitted them to the National Boys and Girls Club. That's the double dipping scheme. Those are the documents Mr. Silva signed saying he would not receive reimbursement for duplicate services. So the Boys and Girls Club were paying for employees who had already been paid by the Stockton Unified School District. But that money from the National Boys and Girls Club did not go directly into the current account of the Boys and Girls Club. It went into that account marked as Bank 1 that was controlled by Anthony Silva. Count 6. This is essentially the theft, the grand theft of monies from the National Boys and Girls Club. So it is essentially the same as, I believe, count 3, but it just lists a different victim. The general allegations are that, we'll go through these since I finished with the accounts here. The general allegations are that the amounts alleged are minimum amounts and do not reflect what could be the true amount. That's why I'm not giving facts and figures right now. This is an ongoing investigation. So if I said $74,000 was taken from Mr. Silva, from, let's say, fundraisers or from private donations, that might not be the true account. It might be much higher. There is a lot of cash that flowed into Mr. Silva's account that we cannot find out the source. A lot of cash. Second of all, the documents during this time from the Boys and Girls Club cannot be located. We have no idea where the receipts, log entries, accounting documents, board minutes, board agendas, or memberships can be located. This was an ongoing investigation. We gave as much information as we possibly could to the grand jury in this particular case. We were unable to provide this information. We could find no one who could provide this information. And in fact, those people who should have known where they were, such as independent auditors, were prohibited from finding this information. Those people who were called in to try to salvage the Boys and Girls Club. So a institution well into their 50th year, they had just celebrated their 50th year of preventing or for helping underprivileged children. Those individuals were prevented from finding these documents to try to keep this Boys and Girls Club afloat. And they were specifically prevented from finding these documents through obfuscation and through obstacles thrown in front of these individuals by Mr. Silva and those people associated with Mr. Silva on the Stockton Boys and Girls Club board. These items have not been located since. In addition, the current investigation parameters, I want to go over what we're looking at now. I'm sure many of you in the press have covered Mr. Silva for many years. And I'm sure you have a lot of questions about other areas, because I've read those reports. But this is specifically what we're following. 1, we obtained and analyzed the following documents: the National Boys and Girls Club documents, the Stockton Unified School District documents, the bank records that belong to the Boys and Girls Club from 2010 to a little over 2013, and Mr. Silva's bank of records, 3 sets of bank records during this period of time. That's what's indicated here in these 16, 17 binders before you. All these binders here are grand jury exhibits. These are all testified to and presented before the grand jury. The Stockton bank records that you see here before you, which are on the second level, we only analyze checks going out of the Boys and Girls Club over $500. There is $2.7 million that flowed out in a 3-year period from the Stockton Boys and Girls Club, which are checks that are under $500. You do the math, but I'm saying that at best, that's 50,000 checks out there. We did not seek those. We only sought records that indicated bank checks over $500. At this point, it's something that we have to think about, but the thought of getting a forensic accountant to look at 50,000 checks right now is something that we have to put on the bank burner and concentrate at the documents that we have at hand. This is a potential, I hate to use the word gold mine of information to figure out how and where $2.7 million. And there are 4 credit cards that belonging to the Boys and Girls Club that we have records for, but we have not analyzed yet. What we did analyze, however, are the records to the right of me. And we analyzed some records that occurred recently, to which I referred to in court, which gave us a window into what was going on between 2010 and 2014. The investigation that we have now is ongoing. It has not stopped with this indictment. It is ongoing with the search warrants that we served. It is ongoing with the documents that we have yet to review that we're already in possession of. We might serve extra search warrants at other places, including other banks, determining on whether we find an indication that there are other banks out there that we need to look into. There is an overlap between the Kids Club and the Stockton Boys and Girls Club in our current investigation, because money was dispersed after the Boys and Girls Club was shut down by the National Charter, and when the Kids Club then received the final disbursement from the Boys and Girls Club. In addition, the 2016 analysis of the Kids Club which means not the analysis we did in 2016, but the analysis of things that are going on at the Kids Club last year, indicate a continuing course of criminal conduct. Specifically, as I alluded to in court during the bail motion, there are 3 sets of American Express cards that were currently being used in 2016. One belonged to Anthony Silva, one belonged to the Kids Club, and one belonged to, yes, the Boys and Girls Club of Stockton, which was no longer supposed to be in existence. But there is currently an American Express card in the name of the Stockton Boys and Girls Club. A 2016 initial analysis indicates that the Kids Club account, not Mr. Silva's account and not the Boys and Girls Club account, but the Kids Club account, bank and credit cards, is paying for Anthony Silva's personal expenses. These are the types of personal expenses that we're talking about. We have on the Kids Club account a reoccurring charge, which means that it is an automatic payment month to month for FilipinoCubic.com. The trip to the Philippines that the press covered, much of the expenses related to that trip were paid by the Kids Club American Express account. The expenses related to a trip to South Lake Tahoe were paid by the Kids Club account, and or was paid by the bank account belonging to the Kids Club to Anthony Silva's personal account. That included also charges to Motel 6 and retail purchases to places like Best Buy. This continued investigation was done and shown to show a pattern of behavior related to the current charges. What does that mean? That means that the current charges or the current investigation, when we look at the things that are going on with the credit cards in 2016, match the pattern of what was going on with credit cards in the 2010 to 2014 time period. That stuff has not been analyzed yet, but initial analysis indicate that that's exactly what was going on back then, which means that personal accounts were being used for Mr. Silva's personal expenses during the Boys and Girls Club time period of 2010 to 2014. This is what it indicates. We haven't analyzed it yet, but this is what it indicates. In addition, the continued investigation now is here to develop future charges, which means that everything that happened after February 24th, 2016 might relate to future charges. That things involving different bank accounts that we know about and that we don't know about may revolve in other charges. If there are other individuals who indicate that they had knowledge of what was going on, that assisted, facilitated, or encouraged in any particular way, that is aiding and abetting. You might have heard some of that at the bail hearing today. The continued investigation will potentially reach back prior to 2010, because the theft and misuse of public funds, like murder, has no statute of limitations. The next steps. The indictment is the same thing as an information. An information is filed after a preliminary is heard, after a complaint is done. In this particular case, an indictment is done after a grand jury has heard a case. A grand jury has heard a case, has issued a true bill, finding these 6 charges to be worthy of going forward to trial. The judge signed off on it, and that's where the $1 million bail came from, and the allegation, or the 1275 allegation, in that Mr. Silva, if he tries to come up with any bail amount, that he has to explain where that money came from. There is no preliminary hearing, so the next date that the judge alluded to would be a trial date or motion date. The grand jury transcripts are currently sealed, and you won't be able to get your hands on them until 10 days after the defense attorneys get a hands on them. That is a statutory requirement, unless the judge does so on his own motion, on the motion of the defense attorneys, or for that matter, us, to seal the grand jury records. We next need to send copies that are before you through to the defense attorneys. We're still going through all those boxes that you videotaped us going through over at the service of the search warrants. Those might turn out to be current. We might have some discovery motions based on that. Motion date will be set. The first motion date I expect to be set would be what's called a 995 motion. That's a motion to dismiss. That SOP up there says standard operating procedure. I'll be shocked if they don't file a 995 motion. The next motion will be a motion to dismiss vindictive prosecution. There's a question mark there. I don't know if there's going to be a motion for vindictive prosecution, but I'm reading in the LA Times that Mr. Sawyer said that the reason that we're filing these charges is because a judge in Amador County reduced a felony count to a misdemeanor. And that we're filing these charges based on sour grapes. If Mr. Sawyer or Mr. Reichel or any other attorney representing Mr. Silva wishes to come forth and argue that our motivation is political, that it is personal, there is a process to do that. It's not the press. You get out your law book. You sit at your computer. You write your facts. You apply the law to the facts, and then you go to a judge and you argue it. You don't go to the press and whine. So we categorically deny all of Mr. Sawyer's comments in court today, in the press in the past few days, anything that he said about the Amador County District Attorney's Office, which is an independent office. Read the Constitution. All 58 counties elect their own district attorney. They are constitutionally mandated. We have no sway over them. And to say otherwise not only insults us, but insults the Amador County's District Attorney's Office, who are operating as an independent agency charged with all the ethical requirements of the state bar and what the courts and laws have told them. And there is no indication, because there's no motion by the defense, to say otherwise. And there will not be in here that he can prevail on. But don't whine to the press. Come to me, give me a motion, and let a judge sign it. The next big date would be a trial. As I indicate, there is no time limit. I can't give you when it's going to happen. The defendant waived time. If he did not waive time, that means that we would have to bring the trial within 60 days. Usually that would be set 45 days from now. To be fair to the defense, this is a lot of information. This looks maybe like I could read this in maybe a couple of weeks, but could you analyze it? Could you data entry it? Could you do the massive amount of work that the forensic accountant from the FBI sat down and not only did not start from how do I prove the defendant guilty? She sat down and looked at this and said, what is this going to tell me? How do I read this? How can I justify these expenses? What does this tell me? Much like a forensic pathologist, a forensic accountant goes in there and just tries to figure out what do these all mean, and comes to a conclusion based on his or her experience and expertise, backed up by mounds and mounds of paper. They'll have to do the same here, more likely than not. So don't expect this to go soon anytime. However, if it does, people are ready to go to trial at any moment. That's all. Any questions?